I feel this is a homecoming, not just in the sense of being with Richard and David and Walter, and most of all you, to be back at Harvard, but also in a deeper genetic sense. I was produced on this planet as an American-Irish person. And to come back to Boston, which is, after all, the Atlantic seaport to which 8 of my great-grandparents arrived after migrating from the old world, after climbing the 3,000-mile wall of the stormy North Atlantic, to come to a new and kind of scary continent, to start a new life, settling around Boston, Woburn, Waltham, is coming back to my roots. There are many ways in which I could talk, many metaphors, many models, many computer programs. I could pop in the biocomputer today. I started off with the sociobiological or the genetic to recall for myself and for you that I have an Irish background, which is nicely celebrated in Boston. As soon as I got old enough to look around the planet, I migrated away from Massachusetts, 3,000 miles west. And for the last 30-odd years, I have been an immigrant, a migrant, a frontier person on the far banks of the Pacific Ocean, a Californian. So it's like coming back to the old sod to come to Boston. As I did at the invitation of David McClellan in 1960 to meet up with my partner and friend Richard. I didn't know much about Harvard when I got here. The first few weeks I was here, I was guided around by Richard and by our friend Frank Barron, an old and loyal, distinguished psychological colleague. As I wandered around Cambridge and Harvard, I slowly began to realize that there was an extraordinary tradition here. A mainline tradition of psychological inquiry. Now, I'm not talking about Professor Skinner, or Professor Bruner, or Professor Kissinger, or Professor Schlesinger, all of whom have performed brilliantly. I'm talking about another tradition which has existed in this small village since the early days of its founding. A tradition of transcendental thinking, a tradition of wondrous internal paganism, a tradition that said, turn on, tune in, go within, become self-reliant. A tradition that was perhaps founded by Ralph Waldo Emerson. You know, Emerson's an interesting person. Emerson came to the Harvard Divinity School in, I believe, 1838. Before that, he'd been in Europe, where he had hung out with such notorious druggies as Coleridge, Wordsworth, the nature school of English philosophy and poetry, who were expanding their minds with such substances as hashish, opium, turning on their minds with such strange and curious and illuminating books as the Bhagavad Gita. So Emerson came back to Boston, came across the Charles River at the Harvard Divinity School, gave that famous speech in which he said, "Don't look for God in the temples, nor in the buildings, nor from the pulpits. Look within, find the divinity inside yourself, drop out, become self-reliant," translated as do your own thing. And for, I believe, 33 years, he was not allowed back on these sacred territories. We're back after 20.
They're more forgiving now.
As an evolutionary genetic scientist, I would hope this is one piece of evidence suggesting that evolution is speeding up. Of course, American psychology, as we were taught it, was founded by a Harvard professor named William James.
Yeah.
He wrote Principles of Psychology, which is the classic text of American psychology. Kind of looking that over as I arrived here, I came across those interesting chapters which led me to read the other book by William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience.
Yeah.
A book which has corrupted many a mind, in which he describes the glories of nitrous oxide in far more colorful prose than the most intoxicated Irishman. Every day as we walked from across Harvard Square to our offices in 5 Divinity Avenue, the significance of which did not escape us, we passed by that little jeweled chapel, the Swedenborgian chapel, and Frank Barron told me that William James's father was I think he was the minister there. The great eminence of the social relations department in those days was another wondrous New England scholar named Harry Murray.
Yeah. Good man.
Harry Murray was not your run-of-the-mill pedantic academic. Among other things, he was one of the founders of the OSS, which later became the CIA.
Oh, God.
During World War II, he assembled the best minds, if there are such, of American psychology to develop new ways of assessing personality. Some of the first studies on brainwashing, drug-induced cathartic verbalization were done by the OSS. When we met Murray for the first time, after we'd started our research, he looked with great interest and approval, and as I remember, quickly volunteered to be one of our subjects. It was a little later that we discovered that the tradition of transcendental thinking, the tradition of mind-expanding chemistry, was not limited to Emerson or Thoreau or to Margaret Fuller, one of the first great American feminist philosophers, who also had spent some time in Europe studying transcendental philosophy, taking the drugs of the time, married a dashing Italian revolutionary baron, came back to America to continue the crusade, and unfortunately was shipwrecked off Fire Island. In addition to this long tradition, mainstream tradition of far out Sufi, Gnostic, Harvard experimentation, there was another branch of drug research. The CIA had been running projects in this area for at least 10 years before David McClellan brought the two of us together. Matter of fact, hundreds of Harvard students had been tripped out by answering ads in the Harvard Crimson. He goes, "You got $25 if you volunteered for an experiment."
Really?
Mm-hmm.
CIA?
Yeah. Turned out later that such people as Ken Kesey and Allen Ginsberg had first been illuminated by volunteering for such experiments. So when I got here in 1960, I must tell you that I was a square kid on the block. Harvard University was the big league of chemical psychoactive exploration. And for that, I thank you, John Harvard. Starting in 1960, that was an interesting year. John Kennedy was running for the presidency against Richard Nixon. I guess he stole it, the election in Texas and Chicago, but in any case, he became president. There was a sense of youthful energy in the country. Richard and I, and Frank Barron, and Walter Clark, and Gunther Weil, George Litwin, and Ralph Metzner, and many others began what was known as the Harvard Psychedelic Research Project. In those days, it did seem almost miraculously simple. We gave, we shared, we took these drugs as novices, as amateurs, hesitantly moving into a field that had no signposts or guidelines. There was simply no language in Western psychology to describe altered states of consciousness or ecstasies or visions or terrors. The psychiatrist said these were psychotomimetic experiences, but that didn't seem to tell us too much. We were smart enough, and I give us this credit, to know how little we knew. We shared these experiences with several hundred people. First of all, with young graduate students and with young instructors and older professors. Matter of fact, anyone that really wanted to take the voyage was welcome to come along. We went out to Concord Prison because we wanted to see how the illuminated or the activated or the accelerated brain would work with people very dissimilar from Harvard professors and divinity school scholars. With the leadership of Dr. Pankey and Walter Clark, we went over to Boston University, and on that famous Good Friday, gave psychedelic drugs and placebos to, I think, 30 divinity students from Andover, Newton. It's probably the greatest Good Friday in 2,000 years. For half of the subjects. The control subjects got to read the Bible. If we learned one thing that day, Walter, we learned that it's foolish to do a double-blind control placebo experiment in which you have half the people in the room on LSD and the other half not, because after 5 minutes, no one's fooling anyone. In these first 2 or 3 years, we performed without the benefit of federal grants or foundation support. There must have been 30, 35 of us working together voluntarily with no principal investigators. Once you put that pill in your mouth, you were the principal investigator, like it or not. It did seem so simple and so wondrous, because we were fairly good people with a wonderful support system, seriously and frivolously, joyously and thoughtfully, knowing that we were on some frontier, moving into some wonderful future. And naturally, our results were positive. Because we were positive. There were a few moments of fright. Ships lost aloft. Aldous, where are you? Where'd Aldous go? Oh, yeah. Bump. Here's Aldous. There's Wilbur and Orville. We kept careful records, and we made thoughtful observations and came out with many important theories of psychopharmacology, including set and setting and so forth. The problem was, of course, that I guess the world wasn't ready for us.
I think they were. I think it all worked fine.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I don't for one moment wish that I was not thrown out of Harvard. Anymore.
There are a few Harvard people here in the room. About 10%? I think I can speak for Richard when I say that we have never, since the day of our being canned, felt any rancor towards Harvard University. I've already told you it's the main line of American mysticism and transcendental thinking. You're way ahead of West Point on that. There have been many wonderful men and women that have been Harvard graduates, and it's nice to say, I'm a Harvard graduate.
History of Harvard, there have only been 2 men that have been fired.
That true? Really? I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Emerson doesn't count. He was like on long sabbatical.
Whether it's a fact or not, I love the image.
Yeah. It's a serious question, in 100 years, whether Harvard will be known for its graduates or its
Oh, God. What a chutzpah he has. It's unbelievable.
Now, what was the name of that college that fired Socrates, Richard? We're going to make sure that Harvard's name will go down in history. When we left Harvard, by the way, it was the Harvard Crimson that got us canned. The Harvard Crimson has asked both of us to write an op-ed essay, which will appear, I think, in Monday's paper. I'd like to accept that invitation. If you're going to be around, we can do it together.
I'm not going to do it.
I know, is it okay if I do it?
Yes.
What I'd like to do,
Send my love.
and if the Harvard Crimson's here, what I'd like to do is I'd like to come over to the Harvard Crimson office tomorrow and sit there in the newsroom, and if you can loan me a typewriter, I can even handle a word processor. And I'd like to type a little essay right there in the newsroom. I'll get some notes from you so that...
You'll know what to say.
I've signed your name to joint essays in the past.
He has indeed. He wrote Psychedelic Experience when I was out in the kitchen washing dishes.
Now, sometime after we left Harvard, right after we left Harvard, we went to Mexico, got kicked out of Mexico. We went to
Dominica.
Dominica, got kicked out of Dominica.
Antigua.
Oh, did we get kicked out of
Millbrook. Then we went to Millbrook.
Yeah. Like when we assembled at Millbrook, New York in the fall of 1963, we looked at each other and said, we've been kicked out of one college and 3 countries in 3 months. Now that's...
We're doing well.
Yeah.
And then we found Melon Country.
Melon Country, yeah. Interestingly enough, I haven't showed this to Richard yet, but I got my Freedom of Information files from the CIA, and they actually tracked us, and I have the CIA documents about what we were doing in Dominica and how many people we were there. And they say, these people are going to start, quote, this is CIA language, an alleged happiness hotel.
We should have hired them for press.
The CIA is wonderful, and I'm sure that Harvard being the home of the OSS and the CIA, I hope there's some alumni here of the CIA. Like when they kidnapped me in Afghanistan, the memo said, informal extradition.
Really?
Anyway, no more CIA jokes. That's too...
Yeah.
After this experience of getting canned from Harvard in 3 countries, we ended up at Mellon Country in Millbrook, New York, and stayed there for about 3 years. A wonderful series of chapters in my autobiography.
Just released.
Being published next month by Jeremy Tarcher and Houghton Mifflin. Jeremy, are you here? There's Jeremy. Two wonderful pictures of Richard in my autobiography.
Worth it for that. It's actually good, though. I read parts of it because I've only seen it for a few hours, but it is fun.
So we ended up in Millbrook, New York, and stayed there for 3 or 4 years. And then we realized that we had escaped from a wonderful institution called Harvard University, and had set up another institution called, well, it was IFIF, it was the Castelia Foundation, it was called the
Freedom Center,
League for Spiritual Discovery. God knows we had a name.
God knows, I remember that one.
Yeah. We had enough of Happiness Hotel keeping. The problem with running Happiness Hotels is that nobody wants to leave. So we decided to, we literally decided we would, remember that time we decided we would define ourselves as global travelers. This was after Sputnik, but before Apollo. And we found out that for, in those days, $1,700, you could get an around-the-world ticket, which you had to use within 1 year. So we agreed that we would make an annual rotation around the globe in 1 year. And first Ralph Messner went, and then Nena and I went, and then you went. And we closed down our center at Millbrook, and like astronauts buckling our spacesuits and heading for the 4 quadrants of the galaxy, or like knights of old saddling to go to the 4 courts, or 4 prison escapees heading in 4 different directions. Whatever metaphor you want to use. We decided to spread over the globe and see what was going on out there. And after 20 years, we reassembled to share with each other and with you some of our observations. The last 20 years have been remarkable.
Haven't they?
They have put us through the changes.
Yeah.
And we've put them through some changes.
There's no...
I know there's no us and them.
It's only us putting ourselves
I
through
know
change.
you're going to say that.
I gotta treat your language. It's gotta have to clean up his act.
I'll be the straight man.
Intern.
Richard is a Unitarian.
He ends up his book by calling me a theosophical Unitarian minister, right? Is that what you call me?
With a congregation of millions.
Congregation of millions, yeah. It's not a bad role. It's a little stodgy.
I know. Well,
I read his book. I read
You
his
witnessed
book
that, Jeremy.
putting on this image of myself that his mind creates, and I'm this horny minister, is all I can describe myself as, with hope.
I use the metaphor, one of the books that really damaged my brain at an early age and left me hopelessly,
Whatever you're hopeless.
whatever you call that, was
It's too hopeless to remember.
Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I think that's the ultimate American book. It's the, the old trip up and down the river.
I only crossed the river.
Yeah. Helping to free any slaves along the way. So I can never figure out whether I'm Tom and you're Dick, or
Jerry. Tom and Jerry, I think it is.
Right. Or I'm Huck and you're Tom, or
Yeah. I always saw you as this captain of the African Queen, which is funny considering, and me standing behind you like Winston Churchill, being stolid. He wasn't, it turned out, but he looked that way. I mean, how he looked, giving you courage to go on. That was the myth I used to work up.
Well, we got a few miles off that one.
We got miles out of so many scenarios and so many myths. We still are.
Now, when we
Whenever you want to play, just tell me.
yeah, you can say one thing. When we left 20 years ago today, on our voyage of discovery, I've been very, very involved in politics, activism, prison escapes, running for governor, exile. I've been in 40 jails in 4 continents.
I haven't even been busted yet. I got a brand new belt. I'm ready to notch it.
We may have blown that whole stage.
Yeah, that seems past.
Well, I did it for you.
I appreciate it. I knew that at the time.
Yeah. I find that the metaphors I've been picking up in the last 20 years have been different naturally. I've gone through different terrains, learned new dialects, perfected some of the old dialects. The language is important, and as I listen to Richard and read what he writes, I see that he's saying very similar things, but in different words. At the moment, I'm very intrigued by the language of the information revolution, computeries. I'm entranced and enthralled by the notion of the brain as a network of 40 billion personal computers, apples and oranges and IBMs and the drugs or access codes and so forth, so that we have naturally picked up the dialects of the terrains we've been going through. I have been with Richard now for about almost 48 hours.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts on a farm, coming across northern Massachusetts. It's been intoxicatingly,
Hasn't it?
wonderful
Yeah, delicious.
48 hours.
Delicious.
We're just very happy to be here.
Yeah.